Hi everyone, I hope my light balance isn't too crappy at the moment. It's getting a little darker in the day, so this is not going to look the best. It could be. This is part 2 of my review. Um, for now, right? If I finish the game, I will probably do more review later, but this is at the moment just kind of a for now type of thing. Let's talk about speed just a little more compared to last time. Keep in mind, I finished with plot so that it would feel more engaged, compelling, reasonable to finish off at. We're not going to visit again for a while. Speed. Um, my speed's really good for missions at my current difficulty range of chapters. Um, I have decent durability overall, and part of that's because of how I've spent my OS points. I've learned that there's more things for the arena, so there's going to be more OS points, and there's not going to be enough things that it's actually worth spending those points on. Once I get to plus 15% energy, I am done. There will be nothing more that I would have a point uh, of spending my points on in the OS tuning unless and until they add more things like double melee, double uh, uh, laser shield and buckler, um, extra repair kit, extra boost or boost efficiency, um, stuff like that, right? Because I'm not using melee weapons, and I'm sure those extra points would be fine overall for however many more I'll be getting for if I were using melee weapons. I don't like melee weapons in this game. They are a trap choice. They are typically a trap choice. The only Armored Core games I've played where they weren't a trap choice is where you get a beam coming out of them that fires out. Even then, that's not great in this one. The Moonlight could use work because sticking in one spot while doing that is not a fun time. Or alternatively, right, the boost kick. It was really just a kick. In Armored Core 5 and Armored Core 5 Verdict Day, it was good. It was a good melee option. Energy Blades also actually did decent damage, though tanks were better suited for kicking with their legs than for using energy blades, so better use the kick than to do the energy blade at that point. But that game was so small scale that and the slash lasted long enough, right? That the blade was worth it sometimes if you didn't want to use tank legs. Not always, but a lot more than in the previous games. Okay. Energy blades, in my opinion, are better for the enemy unit to use when they're CPU controlled because that enemy can surprise me uh, with coming in and possibly doing a quick boost. And that's if it's a game where you can quick boost after. This game doesn't really like that. And tactics don't really seem to indicate that it's a good way to handle it either. What I wish you could do more quick boosts in this game. Just one more, right? Because I can do up to 4 and then run out of energy. If you could do up to 5 and run out of energy, that would increase the game's flexibility more. Part of that's maybe that things like ascending boost should not, just boosting in general, should not cost so much, right? If you could, I don't know, reduce the cost by up to 15% itself, right? 3, 6, 9, 12, 15 in the OS tuning, that would be amazing. That would be helpful. Um, I'm basically using the best setup I can for boosting. Maybe not necessarily for quick boosting, but certainly for basic boosting, and that's the stuff that's more more frequent and more reliable. How much time are you going to spend quick boosting in Armored Core 6 compared to boosting? Not anywhere near as much. So faster basic boosting is more effective than faster quick boosting, tragically. What else? Um, that's really about it for speed. Speed needed a little more work, and so did melee. Um, that's part of the problem is because speed and melee each don't work too well. They add up to not work together very well. I would rather shoot you in the face once you've approached and hit me with a grenade than think that, oh, maybe I could get in a duel with you, right? And I would rather that I be the one shooting the grenade than the one risking the grenade to the face. That is how much better it is to make sure you have good distance and not get attacked by melee, or to take the hit and then hit the guy back heavily, than it is to actually be the one engaged in melee. Melee requires you to be within a certain range to be effective. And that range, especially for story mode, is an evil, deadly range. You don't want to be in it. Okay, there's too many enemies that have their own melee options of very high power, especially for C weapons. Melee is deadly if you're engaging in it with a C weapon, just in general. Um, that's gonna be about it for speed. That's a lot for speed. Jesus Christ, how did I spend so much on speed? Parts. No, let's focus on stagger first. Stagger. Okay, there's a thing called ludonarrative dissonance, and I consider stagger for metallic objects that don't automatically repair themselves over time the same way humans hypothetically could, even if it might take several days or 6 weeks or something, right? I consider a stagger bar mechanic to be ludonarrative dissonance at that point because these materials don't self-replicate, they don't self-heal, and the repair kits just seem to magic, right? Suddenly, you have more hit points. And you don't have animations that track your damage. You just have animations for, oh, I've been destroyed, and possibly by certain types of damage, maybe it'll do it differently, right? But if I'm being pummeled by bullets, I'm not finding bullets embedded in my shoulder, and I'm not going to see bullets that are dropping off of my shoulder, and I'm not going to find dents and things in my shoulder. It's just, okay, this is an expression of damage, the animation ends, you take damage. Okay, so a stagger bar definitely doesn't make sense there, because a stagger bar for a flesh and blood creature indicates this idea that you found a vulnerability. Okay, you have found or made, more likely, a weak point. And you're hammering that weak point, and then that creature, maybe if it has a regenerative factor, like let's say you're fighting Wolverine, but he's got nowhere near as much healing, right? And maybe it's limited to a degree even, right? A stagger bar would be a good way to express, oh, there's a limited time where such and such weakness is open, right? Let's say for some reason someone has self-healing skin, but everything else behind it isn't, right? And the organs and bones and things are reinforced, but they don't self-heal very much, or they're reduced because of, I don't know, right? That could be kind of like a superhero or a monster or something in a fantasy game, maybe, right? That could be some weirdness of an alien species, even, right? Especially as a flesh and blood type of creature, because oh look, it's recovering its ability to prevent our injuries against its insides, by repairing the skin over time, and maybe it has to eat someone to do that, right? Oh, you managed to do a lot of damage to its lung, and oh, it's eating that guy, and then it goes off elsewhere into the air ducts or something, and then it finishes eating the guy, and there's blood that spills out from another part of the air duct, and then it drops down. You gotta fight the thing again, right? Make it a staged, a multi-stage type of a thing, right? I could see a stagger bar for that because there's a period of vulnerability you've created that is temporary. A mech does not have a period of vulnerability that it is temporary with unless it has repair kits that are for nanomachines, or unless you are taking the entirety of its mission as a vulnerability period and then repair it to stop having a vulnerability period. Okay? If I if I hammer the shoulder, right? Just take a quick example. If I have like claws on one of my arms and I rip, right? I rake across the shoulder and I tear parts of the plating off, right? And there's just this chunk that's exposed, right? And it's not just shreds. It's like there's a whole like set of panels or plates or something torn off, right? Or maybe I peeled it open, right? If I do something like that, that does not fix itself over time. That vulnerability point remains the whole time until you bring it to a place where maybe, I don't know, you have a repair drone and the repair drone has a way to hammer it back in. That's not likely to be the case. Maybe it'll have, I don't know, it'll have a laser cutter, it'll place it back in and it'll use um, heat and nano machines that are using some spare materials on board or something, right? And it seals it all up in relation to a prior blueprint, something like that, right? As much as it can. That could be an example of something that could have a stagger bar, right? But that's a more long-term mission type thing. That's an episode of an anime. Okay, that's an episode of Gundam. If it's something like, okay, it gets shipped off somewhere and then it repairs itself, blah blah blah, that's an entire background event in Gundam, right? And I can reference Gundam all I want because it's a fairly relatable um, kind of a thing. They're both mech things, Armored Core and Gundam, right? But it's not gonna be, yes, I'm gonna like meditate and my chi will heal. No, there's no magic involved in this. And this is part of my problem, right? The effect of magic and science of equally high power and intellect and all the rest are the same. The visuals and the level of detail you would probably need to describe are very different, okay? If someone does like a blood sacrifice involving a crystal and it just has all this evil, necromantic, demonic energy, and it takes 10,000 souls and then it opens a portal into the realm of a good deity, and you can go send 20 demons in to go fight it and cause havoc, right? You don't need a long, complicated process of like, you've used this much energy and it opens the rift because it violates the law of space time in this way, or like, you don't need to explain a chemical process for that. It's all concepts. And so that's why a stagger bar doesn't work. Just in terms of the narrativeness of it all. Metal is not flesh. It can't self-heal. And then there's other aspects to this, right? As a gameplay function, stagger bars are hard to balance out. If someone has a stagger bar that moves too quickly on basic enemies, it fills up too much. That last hit doesn't matter whether there's stagger or not filled up all the way. It will do the same amount of damage, it will kill the enemy. If it doesn't fill up enough on a boss, then that boss is incredibly difficult, even with stagger involved. And so one could easily come to the conclusion of if there was no stagger bar, that boss would not be able to be defeated without significant adjustments to your damage or its health. Or maybe to its healing factor, right? Maybe it has a recovery rate of 10 hit points every turn, and that's a lot of hit points somehow. Um, or maybe it does 300, it's not too much, but there's going to be a lot of turns, and so it has an extra, uh, maybe it ends up having an extra 12,000 because you spent like 40 turns fighting this thing very carefully and pragmatically, and it's still the toughest boss fight you've ever had in your life because it is an extremely complicated game, uh, probably a JRPG at that rate, to be honest. Um, right? There's stuff that gets that hard. Stagger is not an indication of difficulty uh, in its own sense. It's an indication of difficulty minus the stagger bar. So, if the stagger bar is filling up too quickly on basic enemies, such that you are not saving yourself an extra hit if you need to use multiple hits in the first place, then uh, it's not an effective thing on basic enemies. If it is too much of a like it's fine if it's a necessary requirement to change how the gameplay is, and make it easier. But if it is still insanely difficult, even with stagger, it's not just a necessity, it's an irritant that you have to get it, and you have to get it just right. And that's not a skill problem, that is a what the hell were you thinking when making this game problem. Okay, that's taken like 10 minutes, right? Now let's move on to parts. I'm going to try and keep this as simple as possible. I know I'm saying a lot of negative things. I am enjoying the game, though. It's just I'm enjoying it because I'm overcoming some of these problems entirely of my own weapon choices and my build, or because I'm leaning into the stuff that's most preferred anyway, or in spite of these problems, right? So, or I found the stuff where, okay, it's like a very slight but steady difference uh, to have stagger, and so it makes it easier but not too easier, but it's also not too hard per se relative to the stage of the game you're in. But parts, right? This is inevitably going to focus mostly on weapons, but there's also a lot of frame parts. Um, my general complaint, there's a lot of frame parts I would not dare consider using. Okay, their efficiency at raising certain stats is not balanced out by the sheer number of negatives compared to what I have so far, or the thing they raise is not something that has a long-term effectiveness that's very good, or there's some very extremely niche increases um, in other ways, right? Um, and in general, it seems best to just ignore what defenses the head will provide you, of course, and just go for the best scan range and distance you can manage with it, among other things. Arms, me personally, I don't use the best like targeting correction or whatever. Um, my build is kitted for speed. It's a very good build. It is a very vulnerable build when it is hit by heavy weaponry, but short of that, it tends to survive decently well against rapid hits, whether that's tons of bullets or whether it's a volley of missiles that are not too heavy. Um, I have defensive options. I have 3 repair kits. They're very good repair kits now because I've increased them to such efficiencies. If I changed the parts I was using, I would have to be trying to make a build for the hell of it at this point, because this is the best build I've made so far, and I will only find ways to improve upon it further. Now, as for weapons, right, I'm sure I could hypothetically find better weapons if I were rethinking my kit type, let's call it, right? I'm using a bunch of missiles, essentially. Explosive missiles and laser missiles. There's not really physical missiles. I don't know why there would be. It's almost like explosions and physical damage are the same fucking concept, just a little differently appearing. Um, right, so I'm basically just using missiles. I don't per se have to focus on close range, long range, or medium range for my specialization in my FCS. Because whatever just gets the missiles locked will get them locked quickly if I'm focused on that. And if I need to have a ton of them locked and I focus very well on that, then they will just lock against multiple targets very quickly when they can handle multiple targets. The laser drones can't, but the hand missile launchers can. I have 2 different damage types, which means that unless you have um, an equally high amount of defensive capability versus 2 or more damage, 2 or all 3 damage types, I should say, one of those attacks is going to get through to you better than the other and do very well at it. And the the attack cycling rate I have is very good. And I get a lot of distance out of this, but the game needs more long distance options that do much better distances. Um, 130 and 260 are very strange meter ranges. I would have to really measure those out. Let me think. 1.5 is approximately 5. 5 times 10. Um, so I think it's something like maybe 450 and 900 or 500 and 1000 in terms of feet. That's not a lot of feet. Um, we're certainly not talking um, half a kilometer. We're talking like the average ranges it wants is an eighth and a quarter of a kilometer, and that sounds like a lot of distance, and it really isn't. Especially if the scale of these machines' sizes, I don't know how big a human would really honestly be. It seems like it's about enough for being the size of the head slash the torso, the upper torso, I should say, which is about what I expect of a Gundam, or about the machines I've um, I've described for my game. Most of the machines I've described in my game, anyway. And the thing is, I use 1 kilometer per space as my thing because I'll put it this way. In urban combat, you could easily expect mechs to get very close to each other if they're not trying to level the whole city. If they are trying to level the whole city, then Bob's your uncle, pick whatever freaking range you want, especially if it's long range. Right? So like if you level a whole city, uh right, you abandon the whole city, you level a whole city, or well, if you evacuate a whole city, then level it because that's just how you do the equivalent to an honorable meeting on the battlefield. Um, and then whoever it is has to repair the place to a better standard or not, depending what they want, and then return the people, and then they gain. Anyway, right? If that were the case, it doesn't matter if you fire from miles and miles and miles away. Um, but 260 meters is not a lot of distance. Um, for something along the lines of a Gundam, perhaps, it's not. Something close to like 600 is not a lot of distance. If you start talking to me about a kilometer, right, that starts to be, oh, that's a thing about half my size and now it looks like a dot on the other end, right? That's sniping to me, right? Something might be a dot unless you zoom in. That's sniping to me. And when there's no scoping, right, in these kinds of games, and when it seems like the real limit of being able to lock is about 600 or 500 meters, that's a little low. Um, so there's parts that could be used in this game to really good effect if they were present, especially given some of the battlefields I've seen. Jeez. Um, Not all of this is urban scale stuff where you have whole neighborhoods, um, two or three or maybe four whole neighborhoods between people. Um, the Strider mission is actually a really good example of this. Um, the wall is something closer to like, okay, you've got a neighborhood or two. Um, but shoot, a grid 086 is a really big map, and so is what's his face that you need to get the rail cannon thing from. It's there's a lot of distance uh, rates available in this game. The idea that about 500 is your limit for actually locking on is kind of laughable. Um, I've had games where you have a decent sized mountain, or not mountain necessarily, but like a decent sized mountain base, and maybe a quarter of the way there through the pass of like maybe you know 5 to 10 miles, right? So maybe about 2.5 miles you're able to shoot across, right? I've seen stuff like that. If you have a sniper build and you have one or possibly even two radars on your back. Um, there's not a lot of status effects in this game, thank God, because all the weapons except the basic smoke grenade are not good in this game. They do not provide a helpful benefit to any major degree, especially not against my mech in particular. Um, what else? There used to be an extra slot that was actually called the shoulder slot. Um, this doesn't exist anymore. For this game, the upside is you can fire hypothetically with all four slots, though the problem with that is once you make it so that you can just have four hand weapons, you somehow can't fire you can't fire most hand weapons, um, even though they would make sense. Well, you can't fire any of them from the shoulders, but like you get the point. Um, if I were to try to fire the any of the machine guns, from the shoulder that are good for the hand. I can't fire them somehow, right? There's nothing adjusted to make them fireable from the shoulder instead of from the hand. Instead, you have to switch the weapon. And the switch is fantastically quick, unlike previous Armored Core games, where you would actually find a bit of delay, um, basically, as it actually maybe lifts up the thing from the back, not the shoulder, but the back onto the shoulder, which is why they were referred to back weapons. Um, Shoulder weapons in previous games were basically on the sides of the arms, and so they were shoulder weapons in that sense. You had a wide variety of options. You had small temporary shields that didn't do that much, but they were helpful for defenses here and there. You had um, you had ECMs, so that way you could jam people's radars. They actually had radars in those games. Dear God, I missed that. You had missile flares, and so missile flares could be used to shake off rockets for a certain, or well, missiles for a certain period of time, or to more immediately shake them off. Sometimes you had missiles that would chain with your other missiles that you fired off, and so you got extra shots, basically, and you hammered someone a little harder. Or sometimes you had missiles that they didn't need a lock, they just went for the nearest target, and you had a lot of those. You had back options and shoulder options for those, so they were very nice options if you just didn't want to aim at anything in particular. So I think for now that covers stagger, that covers parts, that covers the remaining issue with speed. My next video, whenever that is, for reviewing Armored Core 6 Fires of Rubicon will be after I've finished the game in its entirety. Hopefully I'll have better things to say. I enjoy it, but I find a lot of difficulties with it, is my ultimate verdict for now. Next time, I'm going to do a follow-up video on the Space Pirate group I made, because I've been needing to do that for a while. That's all. Have a good day.